Um, well, listen, thanks for taking the time and sitting down. I know that this is Career Day. We're supposed to talk about what we're doing, right? And the idea is I'm going to talk about banking. Like everything, banking is kind of a complicated thing, right? And I have no idea what you all want to do. I thought what I would do is talk about kind of my voyage and how I got here, more than what I do. And then I'm happy to talk about what I do as much as possible. I'd rather not just talk. I get really bored of my own voice. So if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, just raise them. Let's make this more of an interactive chat than a presentation, despite that unnerving camera in the corner. So I'm not going to go into this at all. I'm going to talk about like where I started. Right, I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S. So you might guess from my accent. I went to a school that was probably not dissimilar to this one. It was a pretty small school. It was a very academic school and very much focused on kind of math and things like that. I then went to Columbia in New York City, which you may have heard of. Is a good, intense, very competitive school on lots of different ways. And I know that you're now heading off at some point soon into universities. You're starting to make decisions about what you're going to do in school. Every kind of educational system is quite different from another one. The educational system, I think, that you're going in, you need to start making decisions, or you think you need to start making some decisions now about what you're eventually going to do. The one thing that I would say, and this is the most important decision kind of as life goes on, is go to whatever interests you. Go to whatever your passion is. I went to Columbia. I was a philosophy major. Philosophy doesn't naturally lead to banking. That's not a natural career path. I wouldn't recommend that as your strategic decision. But I just got really interested in kind of figuring out how things worked. I like to figure out puzzles. So I like to ask kind of complicated questions and see if I can come up with a reasonable answer to them. And I ended up just taking a bunch of classes that had nothing to do with what I thought I would go for. And I had an incredible experience at Columbia. I learned a lot about me. I learned a lot about what thought process meant. I learned a lot about what I found to be my passion. And as Columbia is in New York City, I ended up then going to a trading house. I went to go to an American bank where I was trading. The trading, as you've seen in movies, is where there's lots of screens and people yelling and flashing lights and all this stuff. And that's actually what it's like. It is actually it is as stressful as it looks. And once again, I ended up going there because it was figuring out puzzles. It was figuring out why things happened, and that really I found to be my passion. So, if you think about kind of my life and my career path, as you'll be in about 4 or 5 years, I went to a school which was very much a general school. I studied lots of different things. I got pretty good at math because that was what interested me. I then went to philosophy because it was just interesting to me. And then I ended up in a trading shop because I found that I was good at it because I wanted to go home every day and figure out the puzzles that were facing me. Thank you. And I then went on to work for a French bank. I was there for about 25 years. I continued down the path of this trading thing, which I'll talk about in a second, what it is, what we're doing, why we're doing it. But I would say that the kind of central process of my career has been to look and wait for opportunity and to be open to different things and to be open to changes, as opposed to deciding when I was 15, 16, 17, 18 what I wanted to do. And I think that most of the people I know who have been successful as they go down the path of life, they rarely end up doing what they think they're going to do. They find themselves in a place because they're open to opportunity change. And they're flexible in the way that they kind of develop and evolve. In my trading, I started out, and I won't get into too much details, it gets quite technical, but I started out in New York trading equities and stocks, bonds. You know, your parents buy stocks and bonds and stuff. And I did that. And we did it on a massive scale and technologically. When I went to the French bank then, I was kind of pursuing the path because I lived in France when I was 15. Once again, following passion more than career intent. This French bank offered me opportunity, which would also involve some time spent in Paris. I was with the French bank for 23 years. I started in New York from 1990, I'm very old, from 1994 to 1999. I then moved to Australia to set up, I was at the bank 1994 and 1999. I was kind of bored. I tend to get bored. I want to do something different. I quit to go to a different bank. And the French bank said, don't quit, stay with us. Go to Australia and open up our office in Sydney and see what happens. And this is another kind of moment of pivot of change where a big decision is to be made. The natural career path decision at that point was to go to the other bank. It was in New York, it was intense, it was money, opportunity, all the different stuff at 29 years old that one wants. But I thought that there was an opportunity to do something totally different out of the box, in a new way, in a new place. And I went to Australia and I set up an operation. I had 15 people working for me at 29 years old. Had no idea what I was doing in retrospect. I mean, I landed, had absolutely no clue. I made a lot of mistakes and I learned from all of them. And I then went back to New York 2003 to 2006. And I moved to Paris in 2006 to then run global sales. Once again, just a series of kind of different decisions, which were opportunistic rather than intentional. But every time I did something different, the Australian move is a good example. I learned something that no one else had learned. I did something no one else had done. And I found myself at the ripe old age of 33 as being a generalist more than a specialist in my career, meaning that I had managed people on sales and marketing. I managed people on buying and selling stuff, what we call trading. I had worked in Australia, Hong Kong, Paris, London, and New York. And I moved to Paris to be global head of sales, so I had about 2,000 people working for me. Again, I was a philosophy major, right? So just to be clear, I was a philosophy major, and I had no intent to do all this. But I found myself to be pretty good at something because I was open to a lot of different things. And most people were afraid to change and afraid to move. In 2008, there was a pivotal moment where there was a big fraud in the bank that I worked for, and there was a big loss of 5 billion euros. Well, happy to talk about that, but that was not a wonderful moment. That being said, what we found after this happened was that we needed managers who could do lots of different things. They could speak to the press, they could manage emotional events, they could manage change, they could manage technology, they could manage risk-taking, and they could look at kind of education, skill set, and see how we had to develop people. And at that point, the board called me and asked me to be global head of trading, and eventually global head of markets. So running a division at the bank of about 5,000 people, which it's bank and finance, so revenue kind of means everything, which generated about 5 billion euros of revenue. So it was a big business in a lot of different ways. What I noticed at that time is I had a lot of incredibly smart, really good people working for me who had made the other career path decision, the career path decision of being really good at math, really good at technology, and being focused on one thing and doing that one thing really, really well for their life. They had a great life. It's a wonderful career path. It's absolutely something that you as individuals, as whoever you are, can decide to do. It's not what I did, and I think it's important to realize that there's kind of different ways to live life in the career path. You can decide what you want to do and be focused on it, or you can kind of roll with the punches and evolve. And I certainly took the latter path. I was at the bank until 2016, and now I run a company called TPI. Before we get into some of the details of finance, and I'll talk about banking, because this is banking. I'll talk about markets, because marketing is a kind of subsector of it. And I'm happy to talk about what TPI is. Today we're talking about banking. So what does banking mean? Banking has a few different general kind of contexts that we should be aware of, because I think people tend to think about it as kind of monolithic, and it's not. Within banking, you've got commercial banking, you've got retail banking, you've got what we call investment banking. Retail banking, you know what it is. It's the machine around the corner. It's kind of dealing with your day-to-day when you pay a credit card, whatever else. Commercial banking is helping stores develop themselves, finance themselves, a lot to do with anything to do with kind of commerce and payments and everything else. And then investment banking, which is closer to what I do, is managing investments, loans, and any sort of transaction. So commercial real estate, somebody owns this building that probably has a loan on it. And there's an investment banker somewhere who put a lender and a buyer together, and that's investment banking at the end of the day. Sports finance, sports management, all that would be going through an investment banker who would be providing funding and lending to whatever would eventually be done. If a psychiatric group wanted to set up and develop a practice, they'd be going to a bank to get lent money to develop what they're doing. Then within the investment bank, you have what's called kind of structured finance. So that's where somebody's lending lots of money to do things like to buy a ship and to move oil from the Middle East to somewhere else, or whatever other kind of need is matched. And then there's markets, and my world is markets. Markets is the Gordon Gekko Wall Street stuff, again, where people are doing things. So what does that mean? There's the stuff that you all know about, which is a stockbroker, right? So when somebody gives you 100 quid for Christmas, you go to the bank, you put that in an account, or you have an account and you buy a couple shares of Apple. And that's at the end of the day, the first transaction, which is an investment in an equity investment in a company. The banks, like most businesses, have kind of a hierarchical structure. There's a constant move up from the small to the big. In finance and in markets, what happens is the purchase of the Apple share is an investment that happens, and millions of people are doing that. Those transactions all get aggregated. They get bigger as they go up in the structure of finance, and you get to what is TPI cap. So here I'll talk a little bit about what I do today, and then happy to talk about questions, whatever else. When you transact, when somebody buys something like a stock, Apple bonds, there's a stockbroker who buys it, puts it into an account. Those accounts all get aggregated, and eventually there's a bank behind it who's providing what we call risk. There's a bank who is buying and selling large bits of companies. What my brokers do, so there's about 2,000 brokers around the world that work at TPI Cap, and they do the biggest risk, I'm going to define this, the biggest risk transfer transactions in the world every day. So when a bank, JP Morgan or Barclays, has, let's say, bought a big commercial building and want to sell that commercial building, my brokers will speak to broker A and find a buyer for it in broker B from the biggest banks in the world. So our average transaction size is probably $250 million. And we do millions of transactions a day. This is at the top of the financial markets pyramid. It's a very esoteric thing. There's three companies that do it, so it's a funny little, very specialized function. And the essence of it is really kind of risk transfer. What is it that people are looking for, though? There's whether it be a bank manager, whether it be a stockbroker, whether it be whatever else. People need people, right? And I think this is an important message. In a world where technology is taking over and everybody has phones in their pockets and everything can get done by ChatGPT or whatever else it is, and that's all true, right? I mean, it's true. Our life has changed. Your lives are going to be very different than mine has been because of technology, and certainly the same will be true of the next generations. What we find is, despite all this technology, we spend hundreds of millions of pounds on technology every year. People make decisions because they need trust and they need personal input. And our brokers are trained to give an enormous amount of information on markets to make sure that this person understands what they're doing when they buy the building from this person who may be selling them. And it's quite interesting, if not fascinating, that people in 2023 still rely on that phone call. It is often a phone call, sometimes it's something else, to get the information to decide on a transaction. So we talk about strong liquidity, price discovery, anonymity. Our role fundamentally is to match buyers and sellers on a very big scale, on very big trades, and to make sure that everybody is making a decision with the information that they need in order to be able to make that decision. When I think about the path that I took, and I described it before, kind of going from philosophy major to whatever else, it's very weird that I am where I am, right? This is a very weird thing that I oversee and do in an esoteric business based everywhere in the world. On another level, I think that that process of learning has given me a very specialized ability to adapt to a lot of different situations and put me in this place. The one thing that I would say is I know myself deep down. There was a passion for travel, a passion for seeing the world, a passion for understanding how different things happen and how to resolve puzzles which are complicated, whatever else. It's not by chance that we have 88 offices in 88 countries. We have 2,000 brokers doing different things across different products. I get to go to China and understand what their Belt and Road strategy is around the world. I get to go to Australia and understand why the Australian-New Zealand situation with COVID was very different than elsewhere, because all that stuff is information that needs to go into the market to find the right price. And I think that your career will naturally come from where you are today and what you know about yourself or don't. I would encourage you to look inside and figure out what it is that drives you, And I think it's great that everybody has an idea what they want to do, and some of you will do that, most of you won't, because it's a bit too early. And even if you knew what you'd want to do, those things can change. The world changes, and you will change. And look, I mean, I think that's really what there is to say. What do you what process is it for you? So you're graduating in what, a year and a half?
Less than a year.
Less than a year. And so do you need to take career-specific or specialist-specific tests?
For my Oxford applications, yes.
So that means you're deciding career path?
It's less career path, but because the course I'm going into is on history and economics, I need to take a logic paper and a knowledge of history paper.
Okay. As I said before, I mean, the one other point to make, and I think that even the biology teacher would agree, I hope, everything is very interconnected. And that's probably true more in the world as things go by. But any decision you make today is going to have, kind of an infinite number of subsequent decisions behind it. And I think that people at every stage, your stage, but every stage, get very, very, very stressed out about making the right decision. I think the right decision is never black and white, right? You can make a decision which is 52% versus 48%, but that doesn't mean that it's going to define your future. It's really about finding, what your expertise is and pursuing those passions. So for those in this room that are interested in business or finance, any questions about kind of how the banks are structured or what directions to take? Yeah.
So my family, we're quite far into banking. My father was head of 3 commercial banks in Russia. And
Commercial.
Yeah. And I want to know how different that is to what you do.
So dramatically. I mean, my relation to commercial banking is kind of like my relation to running an art gallery. I just think it's a totally different career, right? So when I was, what I do, and like if you put on the movie that you saw, like the Gordon Gekko stuff, that is what our day is, right? And there's a lot of flashing lights and screaming, and it's intense, and people get really angry, and then, whatever. And then things happen, and all of a sudden mayhem occurs. So when I was, in 2016, I retired, not because I wanted to end my career, but because I'd been at the bank for 23 years. I'd gone through this, this kind of post-fraud chaos when I was running the bank, and we recreated the bank, and I was sleeping in the office 4 nights a week, and then when I wasn't, I was still in the office at 5 in the morning, and there was, it was absolutely crazy. I was also, unfortunately, in the press quite a bit because they decided that we were bad people at the bank because this thing had happened, and I talk about my generalist ability. The fraud occurred. I discovered it on a Sunday morning. I had to come back from London to Paris, and for 3 days we had our biggest days ever because the markets were in turmoil and no one could understand why. It was actually us unwinding the position that we'd found in the equity markets throughout the world, and that kind of experience occurred for the next 10 years or the next 8 years. And so I retired, and I was really excited to do something different. I walked the dogs in the park. I dropped my kids off at school. I did all that stuff that sounds like it's really cool. And I found within kind of a couple weeks I was getting really bored, and that I had become kind of an adrenaline junkie, and my attention span was that of a mosquito. So I decided to do what everyone else does in banking. I set up an advisory firm, and I went through the lawyers, and I had an office actually just down the street, and I was really excited. And then I was like, so what does an advisor do? I set up this firm. I spent money with lawyers. I had a name. It was called Altero Capital, and I had some clients who came to me because I'd had a big job, and I was advising them on stuff. And my days, instead of the doors open, oh my God, let's run here, let's run there, my days became these 3-hour meetings where we were supposed to talk about different places maybe this company could go and how to optimize something to raise money from someone, and it drove me absolutely mad. I realized that, this is where I realized that finance is a lot of different things. This is where I realized that my relation with the gallery owner is the same as kind of a certain bankers. I'd sat in these meetings, I'd be like, I've never had a 3-hour meeting in my life. For me, 15 minutes is kind of testing the limit of how I can kind of deal with these meetings. And that's anyway. So commercial banking is very different than the experience that I had in markets. The one theme that runs throughout finance is risk, and people talk about risk, and it's a funny thing, and I'm not sure it really is understood, et cetera. You understand that if somebody gives me $100 million to manage, and I buy a lot of stocks, and stocks go up, that's good, and if stocks go down, that's bad. Green arrow up, happy; red arrow down, sad. And so there's risk, and then everything that you read about in the papers, which probably seem totally remote and uninteresting, is how do you manage risk? How does the country manage risk? How do your parents? How does this school, which has money to pay for rent and books and food and trips or whatever else it does, how does it invest its money so that it can hopefully grow a little more than inflation, and at the same time not lose too much if things go wrong? And that's a concept of risk. Banking has a concept of risk in everything. Mine are kind of the most extreme risks because we're doing really big transactions with really big things. And if it goes wrong, it can end very badly. If it goes right, it can end very well. And that's the nature of kind of finance. And that's hedge funds and asset management, all this stuff that you hear about, which sounds cool and is probably a little bit less cool than you think. But commercial banking is absolutely the same thing, just on a different time scale. So what I realized in my advisory was I was dealing with very similar concepts. I was just dealing with them on a time scale that was just very different. So in commercial banking, I'll lend $50 million to somebody to buy a building and rent it out, and that price is I can define. You'll never know. You're not going to know if that price is right for 10 years. Right? Whereas in this thing, you can know within minutes, often good or bad. Yeah.
I kind of share your same passion of trying to travel the world, and I like solving problems, I guess. Within the field of obviously economics and finance, is there any tips or I don't know yet exactly what I'm going to do or trying to do in the future. Is there anything you'd recommend?
Listen, I mean, as a start, and this is for anybody that anybody in this room, and I think a lot of the people in this room probably like to travel and see the world. It's kind of the nature of London. It's the nature of Halcyon. It's just kind of the people who are attracted to this place. Big global companies offer big opportunities. I mean, in the decisions you have to make, there's a lot of big decisions, right? Going to a company with 3 people can be really cool because you're making real decisions really quickly about things, and it's probably not going to be a great opportunity to see the world or do different things, or whatever else. If you go, if within whatever your passion is, you go to a big global company, no matter what your job is, if you keep your eyes open, you look left, you look right, eventually there's going to be a job opportunity in Zurich or a meeting in Berlin, or they're going to need somebody to volunteer to do something really different in Hong Kong. And I think you need to make your decision not about what you can do tomorrow, but you need to make your decision on what the eventual opportunities will be. If what you want to do is travel the world, go to a really big global company, and it's not super cool, but it will offer you the opportunity. In finance, there's a lot of that. I mean, finance by nature is very intertwined around the world. The sun rises in Asia and sets in California, and rises again the next moment, and money moves around the world, which is why banks are very global. Technology is also very, very global. In terms of solving the puzzles thing, the question is kind of what types of puzzles do you like to solve? And again, I go back to my nature, which I realized is I like quick answers. I like the green arrow up, happy, red arrow down, sad. Other people who I know and who have amazing careers and who are absolutely brilliant have a totally different way that they think about time frame and puzzles, and that suits them. I guess kind of like school, I don't think that there's the right job. There's not the right school. There's the right school for you, right? And it's all about the individual knowing what the individual wants to do. And I think, when it comes to career, once again, I would just say that I think the most successful people go first where they're passionate and excited, and then they're open to opportunity. Yeah.
What do you think are some good secondary skills that can help to differentiate yourself and will be useful? Like, if you're bilingual might be a good example. Like, are skills like that useful in finance?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really good question, actually. And I think I've been a recipient. I think my career path has been actually very much defined by skills that I had no idea were going to contribute to my career. First of all, being bilingual changes opportunity. It just opens doors, right? I mean, there's more people you can speak to. There's a role of communication that has to exist. It's only a good thing. It's not a requirement. It's not a necessity. None of these are necessities, but it's not a good thing. The one thing that I would really recommend that everybody spend time on, and I think that people do not spend enough time on, is public speaking. Right? I mean, and by the way, everybody hates it, right? Public speaking is not fun. It makes you stressed out. Whatever else. If you have a really good idea, if you're convincing, if you're going to go play an autonomous role in a distant region because blah, 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 if you can't get up in a room and explain to people why you're doing what you're doing or what your idea is, no matter how good that idea is, it's going to be difficult to accomplish the task at hand. When I took over my role, my global role, I spent a lot of time actually on public speaking, specifically media training, and I hated it. I mean, there's nothing worse than doing like a 45-minute speech and then making them look at you on a screen for 45 minutes, listening to your voice, which doesn't sound like it sounds, or like the way you think. It's invaluable. I mean, I think that when you look at TED Talks, right? You see, I don't know if you look at TED Talks. When you see the way that those people move around that red dot, it's incredibly studied, and they've all trained. The reason that they're on a TED Talk has something to do with what they think, has a lot to do with how they present it. And I think the articulation of ideas is absolutely key. But the ability to be able to communicate it is more important than people realize. I think that in the IB system, I think it is supported. Like some of these ancillary skills are supported and are important. I think there's schools where they're not, and I think that's a problem when they're not.
So you've kind of spoken quite a lot about finding the right part of finance for a specific person, and you said that trading and it's quite a high stress, quick environment.
Yeah.
So me personally, I function fine under stress, but I don't work well with other people when I'm under stress.
Yeah.
Does trading I do, but I'm just
Listen, I mean, just as I described it, and as it is in the movies, people scream and yell a lot. They're very bad under pressure. There's a lot of pressure. I mean, so in terms of working with other people, right, particularly in a high-stress environment, and by the way, almost any career is going to have moments of stress and difficulty. Again, time frame may be different, but it's impossible to avoid moments where something's going to go wrong, or somebody's saying to do something you don't want to do, or there's a dynamic which is complicated. The only thing I can say is managing stress personally and other people's, and I manage both a lot, is stress is hard. Stress has its moments. The most important thing afterwards is to look around, afterwards, whatever that time frame is, and to see if you've negatively impacted the people around you and to address it directly. In my space, which is a very specific one, where the stress is using a lot of words you're not supposed to word very loudly in the middle of a room. And this, just to be clear, we have, let's say 400 people in a room. This is a big trading room, right? And they've got different ways of thinking, but something happens here, and everybody's doing trades, and there's a lot of noise going on. Something happens here, and these two guys, and this happens literally every hour, something goes wrong, and they have clients screaming at them because we're talking about a lot of money that has to get transacted soon, and this guy made a mistake, and that guy is therefore going to have a problem with his client. That happens all day long. And again, it happens to some degree in everything, including real estate transactions or whatever else. It's just a different time frame. They will say things to each other which are entirely unacceptable. And unfortunately, there's people around them who will hear things that are entirely unacceptable. And so my dealing with them is, when things calm down, because we need to get the trade done, to take them aside, to probably say some things myself which are unacceptable to them, tell them to grow up, but then tell them, I want them to go back to the desk, look around, find the person who looks uncomfortable, take them aside and just say, listen, that was business. And just people are going to get stressed out. The important thing is not to make it personal, and to make sure that everyone's comfortable in their environment. And if they're not, to listen to them and try to be better the next time.
So another thing is, would you, because obviously there's an element of ability, like in kind of all areas of finance,
In everything.
especially banking. But would you say it's quite a routine environment? Like, I don't know how to explain.
Yeah, no. So do I know what I'm going to do at 4 p.m. when I wake up at 6? Never. I've got no idea. I mean, I have an agenda. I've got a calendar with lots of things planned in it. But usually by 5 p.m. it's totally fallen apart. I think that, and that again, just to be clear, I'm not. I don't think that there's good or bad in anything. I just think there's what's right for you. My father was a professor, and he had a very predictable day. He couldn't predict the outcome of his studies because he was a scientist, but he had a very predictable day, and that's what he wanted. My day begins to fall apart generally by around 8 o'clock, and that's cool. And I try to get back to my schedule, and I've got my stuff I need to accomplish, but it's not overly predictable. Now, that's again markets. I think that when we think about finance, and as you kind of go, there's markets, there's lending, there's commercial banking, which is lending, and then there's retail banking, and those are totally different. In the market environment, we are all subject to the control and whims of the markets and the announcements that happen, and every day there's a lot of them, and there was just some now which were really surprising, and so those two guys right now may be yelling at each other because something happened. Tomorrow they may have a quiet day. There's a lot of different ways to live it. Any other questions? Any thoughts? Yeah.
So pure curiosity, what French bank did you work at?
Société Générale. So there's international banks. There's BNP and there's SocGen. There's those others that are not known. So I was at SocGen. SocGen is somewhat notorious because during the crisis period of 2000, kind of 7 to 10, whenever there was something that went badly, SocGen was right in the middle of it. Like we were a medium-sized global French bank who outperformed when it came to crisis and mistake. We were really good at crisis and mistake. And I say that with a smile now. There were moments where I was like, oh my God, how could we possibly have done this again? But I think that's also why I did well at that bank, is because I was able to evolve with it. I was able to kind of roll with the punches, and there were a lot of punches. Sorry, yeah.
This is just out of curiosity. Like, do you still put your philosophy degree on your CV and stuff when you apply stuff?
I do, yeah.
Do you have people who question you about
Totally.
it? How does that come
Makes no sense. So I mean, what used to drive the French crazy, right? Because the French schooling system is a very rigid one, right? It's a very autocratic one. Here, the system, I think, is in theory made for the individual. In France, the individual is made for the system, or at least I'm exaggerating, certainly. But also, the French system is extremely engineer focused, right? Their testing system, which gets them into the grandes écoles, into the big schools, is numerical, right? So it's kind of like India, where the people that get in the best schools get the best grades. So all those ancillary skills I was talking about, public speaking, kind of building buildings in the desert, whatever else, they are potentially of interest. They have zero impact on what school you go to, right? The people I was talking about that worked for me, who were amazing French engineers, smartest guys around, I mean, triple PhDs, they did amazing things. They could do something with a spreadsheet. It was just magic, right? I couldn't begin. It drove them crazy. So after this crisis happened, what they realized is there's something called groupthink. And groupthink can be very dangerous. If everybody comes from the same thing, no matter how good they are, they will not have a diversity of view to be able to make the best decision at the time. Generally, if they're all going to have some failing, and it's going to be the same failing. So what happened to SocGen is that happened, and then we had a bad thing happen. When I was announced as the global head of trading, and I had literally 150 of the best quality engineers that came from the best school, there was a total rebellion. Like proper rebellion. And so this comes to this actually very psychological. So what I did is I knew it was going to happen, right? And so I went in hard. I landed, as we say in the industry, I landed hot. So I went in now, and there'd been a big loss, right? So we couldn't pretend like it was okay. And I went into my first global head of trading meeting, and I didn't sit down. I didn't kind of say, so what are we going to do? I went in and said, we own this, in very colorful terms, said, we own this, we lost 5 billion euros, we almost destroyed the bank that has 275,000 employees. Don't tell me blank blank that what you're doing is right, because what you're doing is 100% wrong. And I need everyone to explain to me why they shouldn't be fired today. And I mean, I landed hot. And bigger words and longer term. And I told HR before I went in, I was like, just be ready. Like, you're going to get some calls. This isn't going to be good. And I had to break the perception. I had to actively break the perception that a philosophy degree from America didn't have the right to challenge and control. And I mean, this was a very deliberate decision I made, right? This was, and so I broke that kind of moment where they were like, well, don't come near me, because I went to the biggest and best of them, which in banking means the most profitable, the ones who made the most money, and aggressively sat down. Then, once I'd broken that, and that took, I mean, it was pretty weak. It was for 1 week. I was pretty intense. Then, after that week was over, I went in, sat down, and said, now listen, show me your tools. Let's figure out how we can do this better. Let's figure out why something went wrong, and let's make sure we can't do it again. And then, all of a sudden, you know, I just said, listen, I could look at them and say that there was some common sense approaches which were missing from what they'd done, that they'd gotten overly quantitative, overly numerical, and all of a sudden I was humble, they were humbled, and then it became a wonderful partnership. But yeah, listen, I'm proud of my psychiatric. I'm proud of the philosophy degree. I get a lot of questions, but I'm more than happy to address them head on. Again. Listen, everything that you do, you're going to learn from. Be proud of that. Understand what you learned, and then don't let anybody question that. You know, the life, and anybody that tells you that what you've done isn't fit for purpose doesn't know what you've done.
I have a follow-up question
Sure.
to the philosophy degree.
Yeah.
Do you think what you've studied during your philosophy degree has shaped your mindset and how you approach all of the problems, especially with like different schools of philosophy, with existentialism and nihilism and stuff like that?
So two things. Well, yeah. I mean, the answer is yes. Thankfully, because otherwise that would have been 4 years better used. But look, I think the reason I found philosophy really interesting is because it teaches you how to think. Right? I mean, it teaches you. By the way, the philosophy I studied, probably to clarify, is at Columbia. It's not existentialism. It's not, you know, is this chair a chair kind of stuff. It's the philosophy of logic. So as soon as you're studying the philosophy of logic, you're actually going down the path of math. Like the line between math and philosophy at Columbia is very gray. Right? Exactly. So in fact, we had our courses were physicists, mathematicians, and philosophers, and so it was a different one than you'd think. That being said, it's all about kind of, you know, basic skill set, right? And I think that the philosophy that I studied allowed me to learn how to think and how to logic. So when I sat down with the triple PhD mathematician statistician I was able to kind of decompose what he was telling me, play it back to him, and show him what I thought was a couple areas of potential error, which shocked him, to be honest. I mean, and by the way, everything I described, the landing hot became a wonderful collaboration of partnerships that I'll know for the rest of my life. I mean, it wasn't forever kind of enmity between us. It just had to evolve, and it had to start with a break. And I think, by the way, that whole thought process I went to was totally enigmatic for the French. When I went into the HR and I had to go pretty senior on this thing, I was like, listen, this is what I'm going to do. Be ready. It's going to start Monday and it's going to end Friday night, and you're going to get some calls of people who want to exit me by the window. And if you want to exit me. But you know, I'm just telling you what I'm doing so that you don't think I've totally lost my mind. Anyway. Yeah.
From personal experience, I've had nearly all my schooling in the French system.
Have you?
Thank you. No, I know.
French system here or French system in Paris?
Here.
Okay.
And obviously, it's very non-IB in the sense that
It's very non-IB.
One correct answer and it's either true or false.
Yeah, but by the way, again, it's a phenomenal system.
Yeah.
It's not a phenomenal system for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I guess what do you think of the, how can I phrase this question? The IB obviously is more broad and applicable to the world, and in terms of the questions you ask, they're never really, might have one possible solution, but more broadly speaking, they'll probably have infinite amounts of solutions and different.
So I think I know where you're going. Coming from where I came from, coming from an American system which is very individual, it was very much focused on the individual. And again, I went to a school where the graduating class was 45 people. So it's a small school, and it allowed for a lot of variation of learning and a lot of individual treatment and everything else. I struggle with the idea that somebody would have to take the back at 15, 16, 17 in science, history, or math, and have the back define an enormous amount of the classes to be taken in university. I struggle with that. I'm not sure I'm right or wrong. I think that the skill sets that you're learning now, I think you should, again, focus on everything that interests you. I think the skill sets you learn now are also broader skill sets about life and about learning and about interplay between how you spend your day and different things interact. And I think to focus too much too early is probably unfortunate. That's my personal feeling. I think the French system is an amazing system for a certain skill set. I think it's probably too rigid for a lot of people who need a different path. And that's why I like the IB. I mean, I think the IB is great. And I think increasingly, by the way, so the French system is a phenomenal one to form engineers, because early on they get a skill set which is very focused. And those are the guys that work for me. They had 35 years of engineering. They graduated after 7 years really of deep math and stats and all this different stuff. And their skill set was wonderful, because as much as I'm describing this as kind of, one-off transactions, everything about what I do is statistical. It's all quantitative and stats, right? So it's how I look at risk. I can decompose risk in 1,000 different numbers, and I do every night. I think increasingly, as the world has gone by, the skill set of stats and tech is going to require a much broader way of thinking. I think that the coding of A, B, C is the coding of yesterday. The coding of tomorrow is going to be a very kind of, almost going to be a brain map or a mind map of creative thought, which then AI and other bots will go and create. I think that the idea of learning by project, I think, is brilliant. And by the way, that's the way the world works, right? There's very few times where the job that you want to eventually get to, you can start out very specialized, doesn't involve, listen, we have a problem, whatever it may be. What's the color of the building? What's the most important dress? How am I going to make the coolest song? How am I going to build a building? How am I going to dig a mine? How am I going to fly to Mars? Whatever it may be. How am I going to fly to Mars is design, it's politics, it's history, it's physics, it's expertise in materials. Like, everything about the world is much more complicated than an ABC process. And I think that what the IB is intended to teach, and I hope I'm remotely correct about this or ignore everything I'm saying, is finding solutions to broader problems and thinking in a broader way. And that's the real world. That is actually the problem that you're going to face when you get out there. And that's the skill sets that they'll be looking for in you when it comes to careers and jobs. Anyway, that was a really long hour at the end of a really long day. So feel free if you have any questions. If not, I think we can give them a few minutes back. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.